All right, so Zoom probably just yelled at you.
Yeah.
Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the student poster session. The students' presentations were so impressive, and I just really appreciate you all participating in that. Our next guest speaker is Dr. Cristina Baciu from Arizona State University. I almost said it, University of Arizona. I'm so sorry. Okay, and
You're getting ahead of something there.
am I? Oh, okay, all right, good. So, I invited Dr. Baciu to come talk to us because she was I think the first CREPE assistant that we had, which is now we have transitioned that into being more of a peer mentor role. And she really set the bar for people who would come after her. She's a legend around CREPE for the work that she did, and it's been super fun to watch her career kind of take off through like social media and LinkedIn and all of the different ways that I have been keeping track of her. And so I invited her to talk at this inaugural CREPCON because I think she has a lot of really good things to say about research experience and yeah, and so I will turn it over to you. I could probably just keep rambling about all the wonderful things I've heard about you over the years and have seen, but I won't. Okay, so it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you for having me. I did have like a line by my name, and it said, Dr. Cristina Baciu, aka one of the first OG crepers. And when I solicited the feedback for this talk from my 15-year-old daughter, she said, and I quote, "That is extremely cringy, mom. Take it the hell off right now." And so because I absolutely trust her judgment, I did. So that's a little fun thing that happened yesterday afternoon as I was done with these slides. So anyway, I'm super excited to share a little bit about my experience working in this project a few years ago, and then I'll also bring it and tie it in all together with what I've been up to more recently, which is conducting research on mentoring, and then really trying to translate that research into practice and creating mentoring programs for undergraduate students at ASU. I don't have really actually anything specifically about the mentoring programs that I'm running at ASU, but I'm more than happy to, talk about that in some other capacity if anybody is curious at all. Oops, there we go. So before I get started, I figured I would tell you a little bit more about myself because I feel like it's important to set up the context a little bit for actually who I am, where I'm coming from, and why CREPE was so important to me as an undergraduate student. And so I'm originally from Romania, where I got my first bachelor degree in economics in 2012. Then in 2014, I arrived in Chicago as an international student, and I began working on my second bachelor degree in psychology. When I graduated from Illinois Tech in 2016, I moved to Arizona, where I initially started working in the cooperation lab in the Department of Psychology at Arizona State University. And then a little bit later, I expanded on my role and I did more research program management type work in the Arizona Cancer Evolution Center, still based at ASU. And as of the beginning of August, I am actually moving into a new role, which Jordan didn't know about. So that's a funny coincidence that you wanted to say University of Arizona. Nobody actually knew about this until today. And so over there, I'll work more in operations and really trying to develop the Department of Translational Neurosciences, which is a new department in the College of Medicine at U of A. In terms of education, in 2022, I completed my doctorate in educational leadership in higher education, and I focused my dissertation on mentoring, particularly looking to understand e-mentoring and how online students have access and engage with e-mentoring opportunities and what kind of factors might influence the success of those relationships. I also want to add that I am a first-generation college student, an adult learner, and I've been for a significant portion, at least, of my educational career, a single parent. And so I feel like what really helped me over the years, even though a lot of times, or in the beginning, at least, in 2014, 15, 16, I couldn't put my finger on it, and I couldn't, connect what was happening to me and say, this is great mentoring. I know now that that was really, really great mentoring. And so I'm even more than ever invested in using mentoring as a tool for student persistence and success. So going back to the beginnings, I will tell you a little bit about my experience in the CREPE project. And here we have a little bit of a timeline. Some of these things might be slightly familiar from John's earlier talk, right? So in the spring of 2015, I signed up for a research methods class at Illinois Tech. It was taught by a new assistant professor in the department at the time, Dr. Nicole Legate. And she was already somehow connected to John and decided that she's going to teach this class in a completely new way, really using various CREPE approved studies to enable us students to conduct replications, basically, as part of the class. And so if I remember correctly, I think maybe we were about 30 students or so in the class, and we had probably about 5 or 6 different CREPE projects. Knowing what I know today, I can only imagine how much, a little bit of a work probably that was for her to, particularly in the beginning of the class, right, to set up everything, get things started off the ground. As all of you probably know, when people do the replications in different labs, they still need, for the most part, most likely to obtain local IRB approval from their university. So, it's the collecting of materials and getting the IRB approval, and then going on to set up the study, collect data, analyze data, so on and so forth. And all these things have to happen in the span of a few short months, usually throughout one semester, or at least that's how it was in our case. So at Illinois Tech, it was me and 2 other students who worked together on replicating a study called the Red Rank and Romance, originally by Elliott et al., published in 2010. And then at the same time, in the spring of 2016, John was elected as president of PsyChi, the International Honors Society in Psychology. And I mentioned that that's relevant because I was also elected as president of PsyChi, the local chapter at Illinois Tech, in the spring of 2015. And so already interacting with John throughout the spring semester, as my team was completing the replication study, I felt comfortable and really excited in the fall to extend an invitation to John to come give a talk to Illinois Tech and, talk to the students about just, psychology in general, potential career avenues for psychology students, so on and so forth. At the same time, in the fall of 2016, I began my work as an admin advisor, I think we were calling ourselves back then. And as John mentioned earlier this morning, we work closely together to, just develop a bunch of workflows and procedures, trying to really organize the CREPE project and make it easy for people who wanted to be involved in it, or as easy as possible, I should say, because I don't know if it was always easy or easy for really everybody. Okay, then in the spring of 2016, John came to Illinois Tech and delivered a talk that he was invited to deliver My team won second place for the project at the Illinois Tech Research Day, and we also presented at other conferences that spring, at least 2 more, I think. And I continued my role as a CREP admin advisor until August of 2016 when I started my job at ASU. Like I mentioned before, some of the work that John and I and some other people back then were doing together were to really work on creating some workflows and instructions and procedures and guidelines to try to make it as easy as possible for people who wanted to engage in this project and bring replication studies into their classrooms or departments or universities. I kind of talked about this already, but I think what I want to emphasize here is the fact that, you know, as undergraduate students, we often found ourselves working together in groups, and sometimes that goes really well, and sometimes it's, you know, less great perhaps, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. But regardless of that, I thought that the work that we did together as undergraduate students working on this replication in what was a little bit of an intense timeline, I felt like back at the time. I should also add that back then I had absolutely no research experience. So this was my first exposure to research. And I think that made it, you know, even more valuable and impactful to me. But what I learned by working on this project with other students and, you know, going to present at conferences and so on, was that really collaboration was key. And I think it was the thing that helped us be successful and, you know, complete the project successfully, then be able to go on and present. We were even part of a paper that got published on the topic, and, you know, we won some awards as well for our work. And this idea that collaboration is key, I kind of seen this throughout my career over and over again, right? This was perhaps, in my case at least, the really first strong example of how important collaboration in research is. But again, I've seen that over and over again throughout the years in my work at Arizona State University, where, you know, people work together on research grants and papers. Like John was saying earlier, it's sometimes difficult to, you know, keep it together when you have to manage a paper with 12 authors, but that's what we've been doing at ASU for the past few years. I don't know that we have many papers where, you know, we have less than 10 authors on the paper. Now I'll talk a little bit about mentoring, and I'll hopefully be able to explain why mentoring is important and why, even though I wasn't explicitly necessarily aware that I was receiving great mentoring while I was involved in the CREPE project, that is exactly what happened. I know that today and today, back then too, but today I think I can appreciate it even more and be, you know, just so much more grateful about it. So I personally care, and I think that we should all care about mentoring, because as I was starting my dissertation work, I learned that only 1 in about 4 college students report having access to mentoring while in college. And that is a conservative measure. If we look at the data that's available, it's something between 20 and 25%. So roughly about 1 in 4 or 5 college students will have had a mentor while in college. There is a lot really of various definitions of mentoring out there. I extracted a few key points that I think, you know, really touch on a couple of different things. And so let's see. Mentoring is an intentional process of interaction between at least 2 individuals. And I say at least 2 individuals because there can be various forms of mentoring. In this case, it would be one-on-one, right, when it's 2 people involved, but we can see group mentoring opportunities, or just, various opportunities where obviously more than two people come together to learn from each other and grow together. Mentoring is also a nurturing process that fosters the growth and development of the mentee, an insightful process in which the wisdom and knowledge of the mentor is acquired and applied to some extent, at least by the mentee. And I also wanted to add that mentoring really is pretty much dictated by the mentee, in the sense that they're really the ones who have the most power, so to say, over the mentoring relationship, because they decide, to what extent they want to get involved, to what extent they're, seeking various help on various topics, so on and so forth. Mentoring has really a lot of great benefits, which is, again, a bummer, considering that only so few students have access to mentoring to begin with. So looking through the literature, we see that students who are engaged in mentoring opportunities while in college show increased persistence and graduation rates, and also higher GPAs. We also see things like increased engagement on and off campus, which likely leads to students having extended networks and better professional prospects, be it internships or career-wise after graduation. And we also see mentoring helping students with soft skills, such as self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. Students also report better interpersonal communication and teamwork skills. And very importantly, I think particularly for first-generation college students and students who come from historically marginalized backgrounds, we see that mentoring really helps in shaping their scientific identity and interest in graduate schools. So students who have perhaps never thought before of, getting involved in academia or building a career in academia, or doing research, broadly speaking, when they have access to mentoring, they begin to see themselves in such circumstances, and to consider avenues that weren't even possible for them before. And then we've seen various studies come out during the pandemic that showed that students who are engaged in mentoring opportunities throughout the pandemic showed increased feelings of belonging and relatedness, and reduced anxiety and depression. So as you can see, mentoring does have a whole lot of benefits. I didn't even probably touch on half that's out there. I just compiled a few of the most important ones. Why did we jump like that? Sorry about that. Okay. Then I also want to add that there are various types of mentoring opportunities out there. Some of them are more or less formal, and some of them are in person or online. So if we were to look into formal mentoring opportunities, then most likely there would be a program in your departments or college or universities, whereas informal opportunities come more from just two people who interact with each other, and start to having conversations around different topics, and a relationship is built slowly but surely that way. Then we see that a lot of the programs are available, or opportunities are available in person, and usually that happens within a certain geographic area. But throughout the pandemic, really, and to some extent before even, but really more so during the pandemic, we've seen an explosion of mentoring opportunities taking place online. And that's really, really great, I think, because that removes physical boundaries, and students from literally anywhere in the world can connect or can have access to mentors that would have been otherwise, unavailable due to geographical constraints. So you might wonder, if I didn't convince you by now, why even seek out mentoring opportunities? And I would like to respond or to address this potential question by briefly talking about something called the domains of mentoring, which were introduced by two mentoring higher education researchers, Nora and Crisp, in 2007. And they proposed back then that domains of mentoring are psychological and emotional support, goal setting and career path, academic subject knowledge support, and role modeling. So in the psychological and emotional support domain, really the emphasis is placed on the fact that the mentoring relationship must exist in a safe environment in which both the mentor and the mentee feel comfortable to have open conversations that really center on building the mentee's self-confidence. They obviously, discuss all kinds of things and problems and try to brainstorm for potential solutions. And really the mentor focuses on providing moral support while practicing active and empathetic listening. Goal setting and career path, as well as academic subject knowledge support. I put those both up here because there is a little bit of overlap perhaps between them. So in the goal setting and career path domain, the mentor usually focuses on helping the mentee perhaps conduct a SWOT analysis, maybe focusing on exploring strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, areas for improvement. And then, with their short, medium, long-term goals in mind, they can work together to figure out, how to proceed, what to do, how to explore various paths. For the academic subject knowledge support domain, a little bit of the same thing happens. The mentor helps the mentee identify and achieve various skills that aligned with the mentee's future goals. But this is a little bit more from an academic perspective, if you will. So, for example, in this case, a mentor might approach their mentee and, talk to them about the importance of gaining research experience while being an undergraduate student, which will likely be beneficial for everything or anything that would happen post-graduation, be it grad school or, going into the workforce, so on and so forth. Both these domains, though, and really all of the domains at the end of the day, really are based on the two people having in-depth conversations where they explore, the mentee gets to explore their interests, abilities, and ideas through a lot of critical thinking and reflective processes. Role modeling is perhaps pretty self-explanatory. In this domain, the mentee might feel inspired and able to learn from their mentor's past experiences, knowledge, achievements, and failures. And like I said before, critical thinking and reflective processes are really important here as well. Out of all the mentoring domains, role modeling is the least demanding one, if you will, in terms of the mentor's direct engagement. Basically, all you have to do is be a good, person and professional who is able to inspire others. All right, so where do we find mentors? I would argue that before we even think about going out there and trying to find mentors, it's important to engage in some self-reflection and figure out what we need and within what time frame do we need it. So, for example, if we were, in undergrad and we thought of potentially exploring grad school afterwards, perhaps about 2 years before graduating or so, we might want to start, connecting with people, get involved in research opportunities, trying to see, to determine what kind of research might we be interested in longer term, start to contact people beyond the university, perhaps even to get introduced to their work and discuss more about future interests and goals. It's always a good idea and somewhat easy, I think, to, excuse me, to tap into your network. So, we all have professors that we like or admire. We're just colleagues that we like and admire. And so I've learned throughout the years something that it wasn't quite obvious to me back in 2014, 15, 16, which is that most people really love to help if given the opportunity. So, and John really and Jordan are great examples of this as well. So, if an undergraduate student, like Jordan said in her introduction about John, if an undergraduate student would contact John to, ask for help, John would drop probably everything to help that student. And now I don't want to say that there is, many people like John in this world. I don't know, but to some extent, at least, people do like to help. So, I always encourage people to not hesitate to reach out, because the worst outcome of doing so is not getting a response, which is still a response to some extent. So, in conclusion, for me, the CREP project was really about collaboration and mentoring. Like I said already, I wasn't really quite aware, because I didn't have the tools and information that I have today back then, to realize how much excellent mentoring I received while being part of the CREP project. But it was really incredible, and it's an experience that I still very much value today. And that was actually instrumental to me starting to get job offers after undergrad. John, in fact, being John, he was so generous, and he knew that I was on the job market, and every now and then he would send me job ads that he saw and thought they may be relevant for me. So that's really an example, again, of great mentoring, of role model that I had, and of somebody that really believed in my abilities and was able to really create and build a wonderful community of scholars all around the country and the world, actually, since the project was and is international. I've learned as part of the CREP project that it's really important to reverse engineer your goals, right? So with the CREP project, for example, we knew that we need to produce this final research paper by the end of the semester. And then we learned that there is all the other things that we needed to do in order to be able to get to a point where we would be able to write that final paper. And the same concept applies pretty much to, to everything else that we do professionally. We have an end goal, but we have to work backwards to make sure that we are able to break it down in smaller chunks, I guess, to make sure that we will be able to accomplish it. I will leave you with two final messages, which are that getting involved in research while in college will be a really valuable experience, regardless of your longer term goals. And as the former president of PsychI, I will also add that being involved in student organizations while in college will also be extremely important for future goals. And with that, thank you for having me. I have here my contact information. I am really more than happy to further connect with people, answer absolutely any questions you might have now or later.
And folks will be able to ask you questions too as part of our career panel, which we're going to transition to right now, if that's okay. Or if it's not, we're just going to do it. We're going to go for it. So I think I also saw Eric come in. So Dr. Gelfi, if I am hopefully pronouncing that correct, right? You could nod or
yes,
shake your head no.
I was just trying to find the mute button. It's been a while since I've been on Zoom.
That's my vibe. My whole
yes,
vibe is
it
trying
is
to find the
Guelph.
mute button. Yes, Gelfie.
You are
Okay,
totally
great.
right.
So, and we are recording this as well for people who want to be able to watch it later. This is a little bit more interactive. We have some questions for 3 panelists. And so I've already introduced Dr. Baciu. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. Also with us is Nicole Mathis, who is also a CREPE alum. She happened to be my CREPE alum. So she ran the Elliott et al. Study on our site and presented it at a local conference and won first place in the graduate student presentation. And I'll let her tell you a little bit more about where she works and what she does. And then Dr. Gelfie, you are a clinical psychologist, yes?
That's
Practicing, right. We looked you up, we found you. But and Dr. Gelfie is also a CREPE alum and is so far, I think, our only student alum who has been first author on a CREPE publication. So that is just phenomenally impressive. It is so hard to wrangle us, people who are me. And so Holly is going to Holly, by the way, who I also haven't introduced, is the CREPE employee. She is going to run the career panel, so I can just sit and listen and think about all of the wonderful things all of you are doing. Yes. So Holly, can you take it away?
I can. Sorry, one of my AirPods just died, so if I like go mute for a second, that's why. So I have like a list of questions that we prepared just in case like you guys didn't really know what to ask, but at any time if you want to raise your hand or just unmute and ask them the question, go ahead and do so. So I will start with Nicole, if you want to tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, where you went to school and what degrees you have and what your current job is.
Yeah, so I went to Apple University. That lovely lady right there. She was my mentor. We fell in love when I was an undergrad, and so then I stayed for grad school as well. I just loved the program there. So I have a master's in counseling psychology from Avila. I absolutely love counseling, but when I was an undergrad, I needed an internship site. And I got matched at a place at KU Medical Center where they did some clinical research. So I started an internship there. And I was already involved in research in undergrad with Dr. Waggy's lab, but that kind of just made me fall in love with research even more. So I started working there when I was in grad school. And after graduating, I was extended a salaried position at KU Medical Center to do some clinical trial research. So I first started out, it was a clinical trial with DHA supplementation, which is just an omega-3 fatty acid in pregnant women. And then we did kind of postnatal follow-up with infants. So I got to do kind of cool baby research, got to do EEGs on babies and things like that. So it was pretty fun. I was on that trial. It was a 5-year trial. I finished out the duration of that trial. And now I am a clinical trial coordinator at KU's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. So I run some drug studies at KU for Alzheimer's disease, which is like, right now it's kind of a hot topic. There's lots of drugs being approved and coming out right now. So that's what I do.
Awesome. That sounds super intense and exciting. Alzheimer's is such a complicated disease. I can't even imagine having to work with it every day. Dr. Gelfie will ask the same question to you. Tell us a little about you, where you're from, where you went to school, degrees you have, and then what your current job is.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Redding, California, which is like really far in the north. I went to school at Southern Oregon University as an undergrad, where I worked with Dr. Cody Christopherson. He's the one who introduced me to CREPE and just open science in general. And yeah, it was a really fun experience for me. You mentioned I was first author on that like larger replication where we combined the data. I mean, it was Christopherson who asked me to do that when I was just starting grad school, and I probably didn't have any business doing it, but I did it anyway because I didn't know I didn't have any business saying yes to that request. So it was like a really cool learning experience, introduced me to a lot of professors that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And like you said, it's kind of hard to wrangle that many people who have that many good ideas, who are living in different places, sometimes literally different continents. So yeah, it was a headache, but it was worth doing. So that's what I was doing then. I went to graduate school at BYU, got my master's and PhD from there. I did a more clinically focused postdoc and am now working at a hospital system in the Mountain West, where I am able to dedicate more time to research. So I do research on psychotherapy outcomes measurement. So how do we track how people are doing in therapy? Turns out it's not that easy or simple, as well as some specific research in pain psychology, and especially shame around addiction and opioid use. So anyway, that's me. Happy to answer more questions if there are some.
Oh, I have plenty. Don't worry. So my next question I'll ask all three of you is, what in your academic life or life experience led you to kind of choose the job that you have now? Dr. Baciu, we can start with you.
Sure. That is an excellent question. And, you know, that kind of implies that I've had everything I had to have together, which is, you know, not quite accurate and true. So to some extent, I guess, you know, at least in my case, my professional trajectory has been a mix of, you know, preparation and opportunity, I guess. But in terms of preparation, like I said before, being part of the CREPE project was really, really, I think, the most impactful experience of my undergraduate research career, and something that I really spoke about actively in each and every interview I had once I started interviewing for jobs. And it was John, actually, that, you know, through conversations with him, I realized that I was going to apply to lab manager type of jobs after graduation. And so, you know, I did that, and everything else is history, I guess.
Awesome. Nicole, what about you? What academic or life experience kind of led you where you are today?
I kind of touched on it briefly in my introduction, but I really think if I didn't have such a, Apple is a pretty small university, pretty hands-on with our professors. And I think if I didn't have the mentorship I did with Dr. Waggy, I would not be in research. So we've talked about this multiple times together, but in undergrad, I was really struggling my undergrad was in psychology. I was going to do a thesis, and I did do a thesis in undergrad. And but I loved counseling. I knew I was going into counseling. And I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but as a psychology undergrad student, it's very hard to find an internship. If you want to pursue anything in counseling, they're not going to really take you as an undergraduate student. You're of no use to them, is what they'll essentially tell you. So I was struggling to find an internship. And I was venting to Dr. Waggy one day, and she told me, well, you should apply at this research center. Someone else had done an internship there. I think maybe a couple people, maybe just one at the time. She was like, I know exactly who you should contact. You should do it. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not ready for that. Also, research is meh. It's only fun because I'm in your lab, right? And so I was connected through that, and I got that internship, and I was very unsure about it at first. But then, I mean, I completely fell in love with research from there. So that definitely was the biggest experience in my life that has led me to where I am. But I love to observe people, and I love reading about science and just being a good consumer of information. And I think it's really important that we replicate and that kind of thing. And Dr. Waggy definitely drove that home. And now I'm working in clinical trials where I do phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials. So talk about replication, you go through phase 1 through 4, essentially. So we're at the tail end of the replicating of that. So anyway.
Awesome. Dr. Gelfi, what in your academic or life experience kind of led you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I wasn't studying psychology right away as an undergrad. I was studying philosophy and taking pre-medical courses and thinking I was going to go down that route. And it just kind of eventually felt like, especially the medical side, kind of, I don't know, trying to shove a round peg into a square hole sort of experience. And I started taking some psychology classes, and it seemed like clinical psych was a really nice blend of the sort of philosophical interests I had, as well as some of the clinical leanings I also had. I grew up with and around a lot of clinicians, just with my parents and the culture I was in. And so it just seemed like, in the back of my 20-year-old brain, oh, that's what you do, become some kind of clinician. And then, when I started working with Cody Christopherson in his replication lab, I remember sitting in his office for the first time and seeing all these books that I had either read or wanted to read. And oh, this person really gets it. This person really, I don't know, resonated with me just being in his office. And then going through that process of being an undergrad and contributing to something that might actually matter to the field was really thrilling for me. And I'm seeing some nods, so maybe that experience wasn't unique to me, because I know a lot of undergrads end up doing projects that are sort of throwaway, and but there's a lot of interest and labor force there, and I had a lot of desire to contribute, so it felt really enlivening to go through the CREPE process. And even after, years after, we're still putting it all together when I was a graduate student. And I think to date, it's still probably the best, most rigorous project I've done research-wise was, within the CREPE model. It just is a great model for me. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here based on my interests and background. And yeah, it's why research is still a prominent interest for me. I think without CREPE, it wouldn't be. I know a lot of clinicians, clinical psychologists end up only working as clinicians and not being involved in research. And that's probably what I would be doing had I not gone through this experience.
Alrighty, so starting again with Dr. Baciu, what does a typical day look like for you at your job?
Not linear. Anything but linear. Ever since I arrived actually at ASU, and even more so since 2018, I have been working with a couple of different interdisciplinary international research teams. So, for example, on one hand, we have something called the Human Generosity Project, which is obviously based in the Department of Psychology, which explores how people help, why and how people help each other, particularly in times of need. That one has 12 field sites across the United States and the world. On the other hand, we have something like the Arizona Cancer Evolution Center, which is an NIH-funded research center that's for evolution. And this grant was particularly focused on studying cancer evolution in animals. And then, the hope was that we will translate what we've learned from there into new grants, and that's actually being done now. New grants are under review or are being currently written, so on and so forth. And so anything and everything in between projects or groups that are more psychology related, and then, projects and groups that are more cancer research related. For the past year, my job for the most part was to coordinate and manage our research grants, which probably totaled way over 10 million over the past 5 years, at least or so. organize events. We have, annual site visit reports from the NIH, for example, where, people from the NIH come down here to make sure that we're doing what we are supposed to be doing. And it's a lot of fun because we get to integrate a lot of our student-related work, which we kind of added to the grant as an added bonus, really. So, for example, for the Arizona Cancer Evolution Center, I co-founded and have been co-directing for the past 2 years a mentoring program called the ACE Scholars Program that has served over 120 students to date. And so it's really fun to be able to, bring some of the students at least to these site visits and just, create various opportunities for them to present their work in various capacities. I feel like, in a way, it's a little bit of the same opportunity that I maybe, us had while doing replications, right? Which is to be exposed to research, to work with people in teams, to, to get to see that there is different paths and career options available. And that's actually the most enjoyable part of my day, if I'm being honest. I mean, I like managing grants, but that's really, it's much more fun working with students.
Awesome.
Yes.
Nicole, what about you? What does a typical day look like for you at work?
Yeah, so part of the reason I like being a study coordinator is because my job is very variable. I always feel like I'm doing something different, and I do not like sitting at a desk all day. That's like my biggest pet peeve, and I don't like being on the phone. That's actually the worst. So a lot of times in the mornings, I'll start out trying to catch up on email. In the mornings is usually when, because I work with Alzheimer's disease, a lot of our participants like to come in early in the mornings to do study visits. So for the studies I'm assigned to, I need to see the participants for that study if they're scheduled. So a lot of times in the morning, I'll have some study visits to run. So that includes if they're screening for the study, which is kind of like the phase to get into the study to make sure they meet the criteria for the study. We'll start those. Sometimes they're 6-hour visits, so they're very long and intensive processes. And then once people are in the studies, a lot of our drug studies are infusion studies. So that means they get an IV and they get the drug infused. And I need to run those visits too, and be around in case they have a reaction or anything like that. I collect some medical history for them, see if they're having any adverse events related to the medication. And then a lot of my job after visits includes regulatory kind of things. So after the visit, making sure that I have all my case report forms filled out, that I give them to my research assistant, that kind of thing. And then we also have to do the regulatory side of things, which includes like being ready for your monitor from a pharmaceutical company, or any FDA kind of visits and monitoring visits. So making sure we have all the right trainings and paperwork and that kind of thing in place. Sometimes I'll be on a startup for a study, so that it's a lot of networking and kind of getting certain processes in place within a medical center. It always feels like have a new challenge every day, something new that I have to figure out or deal with. But for the most part, see participants in the morning. A lot of times they get to come home in the afternoon and work from home, which I really like. So
We love a good stay-at-home job. I very much enjoy being in my house with my cats. Dr. Gelfi, what does a typical day look like for you?
Well, the 4 days a week I work in a hospital system. I get up earlier than I want to, and then I go to the office. And I typically see patients for direct service anywhere between 4 and 8 hours, right, during those days. And typically 1 or 2 of those days I have some more blocks free, during which I'll either write or do all the loads of documenting that come with clinical work, or meet with other researchers that I'm working with. online to discuss the projects we're doing and sort of allocate the different tasks that need to be done. So that's what I'm doing there. On Friday, I run a private practice. That's just me. And so I see patients then. It's kind of nice to do that because I can do it from home. I can, leave if I have a free hour or do whatever I want. So I do really enjoy that element too. And even when I'm doing clinical work, I'm always collecting data. So, with their permission, of course, both for my own edification as a clinician and to have for research purposes later, either for myself or others after it's de-identified and all that fun stuff. So I do make sure I'm working as a researcher clinician kind of at all times. Yeah, that's a typical working day for me. And then later I do fun things like run around and hang out with my friends, but I guess that's less important here.
Work-life balance is always important. That's, I think, one of my questions later on, just how you all do that. Okay, so let's see. What like skills, talents, or like prior experience do you think is necessary for someone to like go into the job that you're in now? We'll start again with Dr. Baciu.
I think for me, the most important thing I came to realize over the years, didn't know, there is a lot of things like I keep want to say, didn't know in 2015, know a little bit more about that now. But live and learn, right? So that connects with what I want to say, which is for me, I think the most important thing is to stay open, stay curious, and be coachable. And I think it's really important, particularly to be coachable, right? And it's true that, if you go ask people for their opinions on things, you'll get as many opinions as people you've asked, most likely. And so it may be difficult to know what advice to take and, who to listen to, so to speak, right? But what works for me is to go out there, consult with a bunch of people, and then use those critical skills that we've gained, right, years and years ago, and kind of synthesize, organize that feedback into something that works for me. But for me, again, it's really valuable to go talk to people because yet and, over and over again, I find that there are points of view and, information that I wasn't aware of, no matter, how much time passed. And I mean, we've been through school, we've done doctorates and all those things. There is still so much to learn, right? And like I said before, people are happy to share for the most part and to help if they're in a position to do so.
Awesome. Nicole, what about you? What are any prior experience you think is important, or skills or talents you should have before entering your career field?
Yeah, so a lot of the same things, but definitely you need some prior research experience. So I always tell people that they really should be doing research in undergrad, even if they don't like it. I think it's great to put on a resume, no matter what you're going to pursue. And then you can see if you like it, right? See if it fits. Almost all of our research assistants, research coordinators, things like that, they have research experience. And then always a very much sought after job for people during the summer that are pursuing medical school is to be one of our research assistants. So a lot of our research assistants are pre-med, which looks great on resumes or CVs. And then same thing, like to be curious, you have to want to learn a lot, not be stagnant. You're going to be a consumer of information when you work in research. So you have to want to learn information all the time, be curious, definitely be able to multitask and juggle. I feel like I juggle a lot in this job, interact with people. People are always surprised somewhat when I say that my background is in counseling, but my participants are always very complimentary of me. I have great rapport with them. They call me all the time. They like to talk to me. They tell my bosses they love me, that kind of thing. So I think that kind of skill set, being able to be personable and develop rapport with people, is very important too.
All righty, Dr. Gelfi, skills, talents, prior experience, what do you think is most important in going into your career field?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to contribute something new to what was already said. But I think as considering research, that's going to be a big deal if you want to go to a PhD program to have some research experience. I remember a really important piece of advice I got, or maybe it's more reassurance than advice, was that there are some diminishing returns. Like, it's not important that you have this massive CV before you go to grad school. Having some is a really big deal, but you don't need to have a lot. I remember that being like, okay, because I kind of got into the game a little later than a lot of students. I think I was a junior, maybe even like beginning senior. And so, yeah, I remember being nervous about that, and it was okay. CREPE kind of came into the rescue and got me a lot of really good research experience. So yeah, I want to provide some reassurance there. And I think, at least considering what I do now, like sort of your basic clinical, like listening skills, the empathy, the desire to interact with people, the ability to have a little bit of, I don't know, resilience or clinical toughness when it comes to hearing hard things to hear a lot. So yeah, maybe doing things like volunteering at a suicide hotline or mental health crisis hotline, doing that sort of thing to get a sense of what is this like for me to hear really difficult stories and maintain my composure. I think that'd be, yeah, a big deal. And then just, yeah, a lot of curiosity, surprisability, kind of openness. Yeah, I think it's easy for some, maybe like senior researchers, to sort of get stuck in their ways, or I don't know, arrogant. But I think maintaining a sense of intellectual humility is really important, whether you're working as a clinician or a researcher. I think it's really similar in that way.
Yeah, just as someone who recently graduated, they tell us a lot about burnout and just fatigue, especially in mental health workers. So I think it's important to, like you said, the crisis lines, there's things like get exposed to it before you start working in the field to know kind of where that is and what's like what that's going to be like for your day to day. So my next question is going to be, what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced while kind of going down this path, or like even in academia? We're going to reverse the order. So Dr. Gelfi, you're going to go first this time, if that's okay.
Oh, it is plenty okay. Yeah, so I think for me, some of the biggest challenges happened during graduate school. It was much harder, I was further away from home, and the professors in my program, there were some good and supportive ones, but there were also lots who were, I don't know, they kind of made me, and I think a lot of my classmates, feel like we were under the gun all the time. They're like, oh, you can't fail 2 things or you're out of the program. So, and failing is like, in that program, is like you get a 83% in a class, that counts as failing, or you fail a comp, that counts as failing. So there's this kind of constant pressure to perform. And, looking back, I think I contributed to a lot of my own anxiety. The system didn't help, but the way I was thinking about it also didn't help. So I think, yeah, just like managing the anxiety of like learning how to be a professional in some academic contexts, which are less supportive than others. So, I had decent mentors, like really good mentors as an undergrad, decent mentors as a grad student. But I saw some people who had unsupportive mentors as grad students, and that looks like a special kind of hell on earth. So I would recommend like really assessing fit with graduate mentors if you're looking into going to graduate school. Because I think for me, those are some of the biggest obstacles, just working with different professors along the way who might be less understanding than others.
Everyone teaches differently, everyone learns differently. You got to find your right person. Okay, Dr. Baciu, what are some of the biggest challenges did you find while trying to get to where you are today?
Well, for me, I think it was navigating the hidden knowledge in higher education, just broadly speaking. And, it took me a long time, and I'm still struggling to some extent with that today. And, I'm definitely trying to do better for our students, but it's such a shame, I think, that, in the busyness and stress and I don't know what other circumstances, sometimes we are maybe not as transparent and straightforward as we could be, right, in higher ed. So, to give you an example of that, like in one of the labs I'm a part of, we wanting to address this proactively, we decided to write a lab manual that we could, pass along to students when they start their graduate program, just so that there is a guiding document of some sort that talks about, what kind of values do we have? What kind of workers are we? Just basic things like that, so that people don't have to play a guessing game in terms of how to go about one thing or another, right? I continue to be super passionate about that topic, and I feel like a lot of times it's even harder for first generation college students, and just for students who come from various backgrounds where higher education perhaps wasn't always or never possible. And I think that, we can do better in terms of having open conversations and helping, like laying the roadmaps out for people. There is no big secret, there is nothing that we need to guard. Everybody has a place here, and everybody should feel included and welcomed. And so, yeah, I would say that was the biggest thing for me that I had to navigate. That as an added bonus, I was also an international student, and there were cultural differences. And so, probably I misinterpreted things at times, or I, acted in silly ways at other times. And so I think it's, important to be aware of these things and try to support students as much as possible.
I totally agree. One of my biggest struggles as a grad student was just looking around to something I didn't understand, or just raising my hand, because you don't want to seem like, oh, you don't know what you're doing and you don't belong here. And so that's probably like the biggest fears that you have, even in your first year to your last year, like thinking that you are the only person in the room that doesn't get a concept. Nicole, I'll ask you this question as well. So what are some of the biggest challenges you have faced when entering your career or in school, getting to where you are?
It's a good question. I would say, of course, grad school is difficult, right? There's a lot of time. Your personal time is taken up by everything. You have no personal time, right? So I worked full-time in grad school, and then I was able to do our grad program. So I have a master's, but they had flexibility to where I could extend that if needed. And I chose to do that a little bit. So I did a 2.5-year track. There was like a 2-year track, a 2.5-year track. I think it even went up to like 4 years. I'm not sure. That could be wrong. Dr. Waggy could correct me. So I was able to do that. That helped me a lot. So I appreciate that being an option. And then personally, one thing I struggled with is, since I was a senior in high school, I knew that counseling was the path for me. And I was like, I'm going to be a licensed counselor. I'm going to a counseling master's program. Like, I was so set in my ways that that's what I wanted to do, that when I came across research and liked research, it was difficult for me to realize, hey, like maybe this could be your career path instead. So that kind of was my struggle with coming to terms with that. And now I'm actually doing a job that technically I could do without a master's degree. Although I will say, I think that I have a lot of strengths and skills that I wouldn't have had I not gotten my master's degree. But you can be a clinical research coordinator with an undergrad degree. So sometimes I struggle with that, because I'm like, man, you could have saved some money if you wouldn't have done that. But anyway, so kind of being set in my ways, not realizing like, hey, you can change it up, like pick a new path, that kind of thing.
That's really like helpful for like, as someone who also got a master's degree and was like, I don't know what to do now. That really helps me kind of think about what is out there. Before I ask any more questions, because we have like 3 minutes left, does anyone in the audience have a question they want to ask any of our panelists?
Do we have, is it just 3 minutes left?
Yeah, we end at 1:15.
Oh, time has flown.
Jordan, do you have any questions you want to ask them?
There's one,
Oh.
I think that's Jack David actually, has a question. So
Yeah,
I'll
go for
defer.
it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right,
Yep, we can
great.
hear you.
Thank you so much. This has been a really, really interesting panel. So I just wanted to ask for like early career researchers from Africa who, of course, we do not have established post-bac positions here, like labs that we can work with to get like established post-bac positions. So we try to get our research experience from all of these like collaborative projects. So how can we fit that into our CV in a way that would show, hey, we've got like this research experience on ground? Do we put it like I was like a research assistant for the CREP projects, and between this time to this time, we did this. Like, I just wanted to get an idea of how to fit this in for both myself and for other research assistants who were part of my own lab for my own CREP projects, if that makes sense.
Can I take this one? Or can I start on this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, I think that, again, since the pandemic was really an opportunity in a lot of ways, right? So when we talk about undergraduate research opportunities and getting experience, the one best thing that maybe came out of the pandemic was that these opportunities became more broadly available, just generally speaking, to people, right? So for example, at ASU, in one of the mentoring programs I'm in charge of, we had students in the program from all over the world. We had students from Armenia, we had students from Ecuador, and anything in between. And so I feel like, it's not important at all, I would argue, to mark the experience in any way as having been an online experience on your CV. I would personally, unless you want to, for whatever reason, right? But I think it can, be added on somebody's CV or resume, just like any other research experience, right? Research assistant between these times and this time and this time, worked on these things, 2, 3, 4 bullet points, and that's about it. Then, if there are posters or presentations or papers that came out of that project, definitely include those too, under a separate section, either posters or talks or presentations, depending how people have structured their materials. And I would really encourage people to look beyond their geographical areas for opportunities, broadly speaking, because CREPE is a prime example of that, right? We were literally scattered all over the world, and we have managed to get these really impactful experiences that are still with us some years later, right? And this project is just an example, and there are other projects or other labs who have, various opportunities for people to get engaged with from whatever they might be in the world. I've even seen recently some, lab manager jobs come out of labs where people can work remotely in that type of position if they want to do that. So.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Okay, I think it's time for us to take a break. I'm gonna stop recording.